from PEI, and some of you may have attended a talk that my brother gave a few years ago on his work with my vascular plants in PEI, so when Rosemary emailed me, yeah?
Can you speak into the mic, please?
Oh, yes, is this better? Oh, yeah, okay.
Turn the mic.
You can take it off. That'll make it easier.
Okay. Good?
Yes. Keep it there.
Anyways, I am thrilled to be the second Crowell to talk at a major PEI meeting, so thank you for having me here today. So I work for DFO, so the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and within that I work in the Species at Risk program. Usually I work on species off the coast of Nova Scotia and in the Bay of Fundy, but there is pretty significant overlap between those species and what ends up in the Gulf. So today I will mostly speak about sharks and different species at risk that you might find off the waters of PEI, but I have a little bit of information first about how a species ends up protected as a species at risk. So the first step for a species to be protected under the Species at Risk Act, also known as SARA, is for it to be assessed by CSIWIC, which is the Committee on the Status of Endangered Wildlife in Canada. And this is an independent body separate from the government that receives recommendations for which species should be assessed. And it takes the best available information, so this can be indigenous knowledge, scientific knowledge, community or traditional knowledge, and through peer review process, it assesses each species in turn, and it produces a risk assessment category. So this could be anything from data deficient, so they can't produce an assessment based on what is out there currently. It could be non-at-risk, special concern, all the way up to extinct and risk categories in between. So if a species is assessed as being at risk, it's referred to the relevant department. So this could be Environment Canada if it's terrestrial or migratory birds, Parks Canada if it occurs on parks land, or DFO for marine species. And then after that recommendation is made, each department has to decide whether or not it will list the species and manage it under the Species at Risk Act, not list the species and manage it through some other way. Often for marine species, this is the Fisheries Act, or refer it back to CSIWIC for further assessment. So after it is listed, we are at DFO responsible for a variety of things to support its recovery. So we work on freshwater, diadromous and marine species, but I exclusively do marine species. So we support throughout the listing process. That's one of my key responsibilities, is seeing the species through all the steps necessary before it gets listed under SARA. And then after it's listed, we are responsible for developing recovery documents, which looks at threats to the species and the measures that are necessary to help mitigate those threats and help the species recover. And then we are also responsible for doing those things that the recovery documents say need to happen. And then we identify critical habitat. So this is habitat that is necessary for survival, that is further protected under the Species at Risk Act. And then we issue permits. So if a species is listed as endangered or threatened under SARA, it becomes automatically prohibited, illegal to capture, kill, harm, harass, or collect the species from the wild, including its parts. So it also includes things like shells and teeth and that kind of stuff. But if you are going to be conducting an activity that might do one of those things, you need a permit, and there's a bunch of conditions that must be met. Oftentimes this is for research directed at the species, which we will talk about, but sometimes it can be for an activity that might accidentally impact a species. You would still need to get authorization for that, so I work on that as well. Okay, so in terms of, oh my gosh, I haven't been clicking, sorry. Assessment, graph, what we do, turtle. Okay, here we are. So these are the species at risk that are protected federally that you can find in the waters off PEI. I will speak to each of the ones that are endangered, but just to note, there are also 2 species that are extirpated. So they used to live in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and due to human causes, they no longer occur in their habitat in the Gulf. And then I also don't have beluga on here. There's not formally endangered beluga in the Gulf, but sometimes in the summer months, what we call a vagrant beluga from the St. Lawrence estuary population will occur in the Gulf, and that often makes the news because they are very friendly and curious and like to come near boats. So there's these 4. And I will give a quick overview of both of those, and then I have more info on sharks. Before I get into that, I just want to give a shout out to the Species at Risk Public Registry. Most of the information that I will give, the high-level information, you can also find for yourself on the Species at Risk Public Registry. It's a really good resource. You can search by species or by document to find a lot of really good science information on species that are at risk, but also on every species that CACIWIC has assessed. So it's a great repository. And you can also find information on consultations. So when a species is under consideration for listing, there are consultations that are run, and there's also consultations on the recovery documents that describe what should happen. So it's a great spot to go if you want to get involved in either of those processes. Okay, so first is leatherback sea turtle. This is one of 7 sea turtle species globally, which I always think is interesting when you think of like the diversity of terrestrial turtles or fishes or birds. There's only 7 species of sea turtles globally, a lot of which do occur in Canadian waters. The other endangered species that we have in Atlantic Canada is the loggerhead sea turtle, but they mostly occur out on the edge of the shelf, so we won't see those in the Gulf. Leatherback is part of a broader northern Atlantic population. In the summer and fall, we see them swim up to Canada to feed, and their main source of food is jellyfish. And when they're up here to feed, Atlantic Canada actually hosts one of the most dense populations of feeding jellyfish throughout the range, which is interesting. And then in the winter, they swim down to the US and Mexico, where they spend the winter, and then the females nest on shore. Both leatherback and loggerhead are exclusively offshore turtles, so they never come on land other than when they're hatching and when they're nesting. So if we were to find one on the beach in Canada, it would be because something had gone wrong. Overall, they tend to travel about 18,000 kilometers annually between their feeding grounds up here and their nesting beaches and southern latitudes where they spend time, which is a pretty impressive journey when you think that it's fueled by jellyfish. The main threats, these are the threats in Canada, is fisheries, bycatch, and lines on longline hooks, as well as entanglement in fishery lines, underwater noise, which is a pretty common theme for all species at risk as the ocean gets louder, marine pollution, and also vessel strikes. But because they're so migratory, they also face a lot of different threats when they get to their nesting beaches down south, but these specifically are the threats in Canada. We don't have concrete numbers on leatherback populations, but the approximations that are out there all agree that there's been pretty significant decline in the density of nests. A lot of the nests are in Trinidad and Guyana, down that way, so we can take that as indication that the population is not doing great. Interestingly, DFO Science does a lot of research on leatherback. They've had a specific sea turtle research program since 1990 where they've tagged over 400 leatherback, a lot of which are caught off PEI. They work with CSTN, so the Canadian Sea Turtle Network, and also the Atlantic Vet College to do this research. In the middle, the picture in the middle here is a leatherback that has been caught. They catch it in a giant dip net, basically. And then they bring it aboard and they put satellite tags on it, so that's the blue dot that you can see on its back. And then they put flipper tags on it as well, which is kind of like bird banding. It's for IDing it over the long term when they end up on nesting beaches. And it's pretty incredible the amount of times that turtles are tagged up here and then as long as 20 years later are still able to be tracked laying eggs on beaches down south. So it's cool to follow their journey. Next we have right whale. A lot of you have probably heard of the plight of the right whale. It's one single species, one single population that occurs from Newfoundland down to Florida, and we've seen really severe declines in right whales, originally from whaling, now from more modern threats, and there are less than 400 right whales globally. They're very well-studied species because there's so few. We do see that they are present in Canadian waters and Gulf waters year-round, but mostly in the summer and warmer months. In the winter, they go down south to their calving and nursing grounds. Their distribution, like most species, is mainly driven by prey availability, and we've seen shifts in their prey availability over the years. So where previously their prey was very reliably available in the Bay of Fundy, that's where we would see them in great numbers. But over the last 12 to 15 years, more of their prey has shifted into the Gulf. So in the southern Gulf, we've been seeing a lot more relatively larger groups of right whales. So that's been interesting and also a challenge from a management perspective as they change where they are likely to be. They're large whales, they're up to 18 meters in length, and females give birth to a single calf, not annually, so that also limits their recovery. They're slow to see population numbers go up. And their main threats are entanglement in fishing gear, mostly vertical lines, as well as vessel strikes. Those are really the big two for right whale. Also, if you have questions as we go, feel free to shout them out, or there's time at the end too.
What do they eat?
They eat copepods, which is like a small shrimp-like zooplankton, and they're filter feeders, so I don't really have a good picture of it here, but they have baleen, which is kind of like, it's made of like the same material as hair and fingernails. They're like giant combs in their mouth, and so they take in huge volumes of water and then spit it out, and they filter the krill-like species. So they have to feed for a very large portion of the day because they are so big and their prey is so small. Next we have blue whale. Blue whale is pretty globally distributed, and there's 3 subspecies. So this is the Atlantic subspecies that we have here in Canada. Obviously, they are, interestingly, you may know, the biggest animal to ever live. They're born at 7 meters long, which is about 2 tons weight, usually. And over 70 to 80 years, they grow to their usual length of about 30 meters. They're also, I think, the loudest animal on the planet as well. When they record their calls, it's supposed to be like as loud as a jet. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting work on blue whale calls out there, so if you want to hear them, there's like incredible stuff online for that. They are present in the spring, summer, fall, mostly, and we mostly see them in the Gulf, more towards the North Shore. And then they migrate south in the winter, usually in small groups together. But we do see in years where there's really lighter ice coverage that some stay in the Gulf year-round, so it's possible to see one throughout the year. Their main threats historically are whaling, which drove numbers down, and now, similar to right whale, the main threats are vessel strikes. For them, also vessel disturbance, in some part due to a lot of increase in whale watching interest in recent years, and then also entanglement and pollution within their habitat. Which brings us to white shark. A lot of times in media, it's great white shark, that's probably what you usually know it as. I will be calling it white shark just because in the literature, it's usually white shark. Mostly because there's no small white shark or lesser white shark, so it's usually just referred to as white shark, but then throughout the world there's different names for it elsewhere, but white shark, great white shark, same thing. So this white shark was listed under the Species at Risk Act as endangered in 2011. A final recovery strategy was just published for the species last year, so you can find that on the registry if you're interested in reading more. In terms of the white sharks that we have, there are some white sharks in BC, so that would be a separate population under the Species at Risk Act. But in Atlantic Canada, the white sharks are part of the broader Northwest Atlantic population, and this ranges from Newfoundland down into pretty far into the Gulf of Mexico, and they've also been tracked via tagging as far as the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, and then the tag stopped, so not necessarily the extent of the range, but it was really interesting to watch that one head out. It was a big female. And the Northwest Atlantic population is largely genetically isolated from other populations. So there's an Eastern Atlantic population, Mediterranean, Pacific, like I mentioned, Indian, Australian, and they are all pretty genetically isolated, despite the pretty broad dispersal of the species. They're globally distributed in subtropical and temperate waters. White sharks are interesting. They belong to a family of sharks called lamnids, and they are slightly warm-blooded, so they are able to get their body temperature a little bit above water temperature, which is unusual for fish. So it allows them to take advantage of a broader range of habitats. And we do see them as far as above Newfoundland in the strait there between Newfoundland and Labrador, which is cool. They occur inshore. We've had sightings of them from the beach, and then far offshore waters along the continental shelf edge. And we know that they can use habitat, cruising at the surface, and then there's tag data showing them diving over a kilometer deep, presumably in search of prey. Their natural abundance, like most megafauna, but specifically white shark, in addition to that, is quite low throughout most parts of its range normally. And within the Northwest Atlantic population, the highest concentrations are found in US waters year-round. Within Canada, we see peaks in occurrence in midsummer and fall, but we do have records of white shark being in Atlantic Canada in every month of the year, just a lot less likely to be recorded in the winter months. And pretty much the entire Atlantic Canada, like if you look at the tagging data that I can show and the map, we have records of them pretty much throughout. We don't have empirical, we don't have numbers for the size and distribution of the population. There's approximations and there's a lot of good work underway, so I wouldn't be surprised if there was in the future pretty good estimates. But we do know that there have been substantial historic declines due to fishing pressures, mostly in the States, due to historic directed and bycatch fisheries. But we do think that there has been an increase in abundance following conservation measures that were implemented in the States in the 90s to reduce that fishing mortality. Despite this, it's still a population that's below its historic amount. Of the last estimate from the 1960s was the highest. But it is, of the species that we've ripped through already, the only one that we work on that has an increasing trend. So it's nice for that reason to work on.
Did you read the titles?
I'm sorry?
Did you read the titles?
Oh, yes. These are just examples of 2 papers that have come out recently. The top one says, Inconspicuous, Recovering, or Northern Shift, Status and Management of the White Shark in Atlantic Canada. And I put this one up because there has been a lot of debate in the last 10 years over whether or not it's just social media that is making us think that there's more white sharks. Maybe their distribution is shifting up as climate change causes warming, or their population numbers are increasing and there's just more white sharks everywhere. So that is a big debate in the literature, but it does seem to be, as of late, agreement that it could be more reportings changing in range, but there also does seem to be recovery, which is great.
How many pups do they incubate at a time?
Oh, I don't know. There's no knowledge of where white shark give birth, which is cool when you think about how much they're in the media and how much research goes into sharks. We don't know within the whole range, so from Canada to US, where they are giving birth. There was maybe a paper last year that came out that thinks it had drone footage of like a very recently born shark, but there's never been a recording of them giving birth, and you would have to capture one that was pregnant to know. So there might be estimates out there, but I'm not actually sure, and it's a little bit mysterious where they give birth. Like, we've never seen a young of the year in Canada, so it's not, it's a big question, it's a big puzzle.
What do they eat, really?
They eat a variety. They eat, the diet shifts over time, so they eat fish, bony fish, and then seals, and then probably more fish as they are smaller and more seals as they are bigger. So one hypothesis for more white sharks in Atlantic Canada is a recovering seal population could mean that it's more attractive and viable habitat for sharks in Canada. But yeah, I think the perception is sometimes that they eat only seals or only marine mammals, but they actually do eat a lot of fish as well.
Seals are their food of choice.
Is the reason why it's hard to know how many there are because it's difficult to tag them? Like, why don't...
Yeah, it's difficult to tag them, and they're wide-ranging, and when you think of like a whale has to come to the surface to breathe, but a shark doesn't, so even the tag data can be lesser quality than a whale because a lot of times the tags rely on the animal surfacing, but they're just hard and expensive to tag. Like, you need quite a production to get offshore in the environment to get them tagged, and then the tags themselves are very expensive. So there's a lot more interest, I would say, in the last 10, 15 years, but previous to that, there was just less research, and it just takes time to build up the base of white sharks that are tagged or observed. And then the second paper here says systematic assessment of the increasing presence of white sharks in Atlantic Canadian waters. This was put out a couple years ago, just last year, by colleagues at DFO and then collaborators in the States through a couple different government institutes as well, and that is the same, kind of trying to address the question of more or just differently distributed white sharks. But what we do know, aside from our estimates of relative abundance, is that recovery is limited by their naturally low abundance that I mentioned, by their low reproductive capacity, so we don't know how many pups they are birthing, but we do know it's not a lot, especially when we think of other fishes. Their slow growth rate and late maturation, so it takes them a long time to get to the stage where they are reproducing. So this contributes to overall low productivity, so that's why we think we're only seeing the effects of the 1990s conservation measures now, because it would only be like a generation or two later. In terms of threats, human-induced mortality is the main threat to the population here and in other populations. But the original Kasiwik assessment, which is from 2006, although there was just recently a new Kasiwik assessment a couple years ago that had similar findings, found that they were endangered largely due to the threats occurring outside of Canada. But we do have documented threats to white sharks in Atlantic Canada as well, which is bycatch in commercial fisheries, so that's the only documented source of mortality. And the life history traits that I mentioned, so being old, slow to reproduce, less young, makes them vulnerable to even low levels of anthropogenic mortality.
How long do they live?
Up to 70 years, but they mature around 30, so that's when they would be reproductive. Yes, they're very old, which is cool. And then on the bottom left here, just some examples of interactions with white sharks in Atlantic Canada. This was a weir, fishing weir in New Brunswick, where they went out to harvest and they found that there was a considerably sized white shark in their weir. So the fishers did a great job in getting the shark out of the weir, so that was a good story. And then some of you might have heard of the shark on the right, which was caught in Alberton in 1983, and at the time I think was the largest white shark recorded globally, and it's still pretty big, 5.3 meters, it's like 17 feet, and they mature about 4 meters long. And this shark was only 20 years old, so it probably had some more growing to do. So I'm going to talk now about the research that goes on white sharks, a lot of which happens in the Gulf. DFO has had a tagging program since 2016, and there's a bunch of other tagging programs that are now up and established, mostly off Nova Scotia. I think DFO is the only ones tagging in the Gulf right now. It focuses on collecting information from individual white sharks through satellite tagging and acoustic tagging. So I have some of them here. Pass them through. So usually sharks are tagged with, sure, yeah, I can show you which are which, but usually sharks are tagged with either a satellite tag or an acoustic tag or both. So this is a satellite tag. I'll pass it around. It has an antenna at the top. Like I mentioned, the shark has to surface for it to communicate to the global satellite network where the shark is. And it also collects data on the temperature of the water that the shark is swimming in and the depth that it's swimming in, so that's how we know that they can dive over a kilometer deep. It communicates data after it's attached to the shark, and usually there is a metal piece attaching it to the shark that the researcher will set to pop off via corrosion, usually a year or two after. And then if they can get the tag back, they can get even more data that is stored in the tag. So usually it will ping where it is for weeks, months, I think usually weeks, and it's a bit of a scramble to get them back, and a lot of the times they're helping each other find their tags. So I can pass that around. That's the satellite tag. And then this is an acoustic tag. It's a lot smaller, and it's also attached usually externally to the shark. These are good because they can last up to 10 years. And a researcher will program it to send out a signal at a certain time. So if you want your tag to last a really long time, you would have a longer interval for when it's sending out the signal. And if you want really fine-scale data, you would reduce that interval. And in order for this one to be picked up, the shark has to swim by an acoustic receiver, which looks like this, which is moored in the ocean. And there is a very surprising amount of these throughout Atlantic Canada, because you might think, how likely is that to happen? But pretty likely. There's a lot of researchers that put these out, and a lot of NGOs that manage networks of acoustic receivers, and there's a lot of good collaboration. So if you have an acoustic receiver out and you pick up somebody else's tagged fish or whale, there's a lot of data sharing that happens, so we can pass these around as well.
Question.
Yeah.
So how are the tags attached, and where does this acoustic receiver go? Like, does it just float in the ocean?
Yes, I have, the next slide shows how they're attached. The acoustic receivers are either moored to the bottom of the ocean if it's shallow, so if you're near shore, you will just have them at the bottom. And you can also have floating acoustic receivers, which are harder to get back. So usually they're moored to the bottom. And it's a considerable investment because you have to go out and get them every year, bring them back, download the data, take them out. So it's a lot of work to get them back, but it's a lot of good data. And then the pictures here, I don't know, hopefully you can see, but the top one is showing the tag being inserted. I also have one of those. Basically, it's like a tether, so this little shrink-wrapped wire tether, and then this is a very pointy little barb, so they have a hole that has the tag attached to the bottom, usually just by like a rubber band, and then the pointy part. And all white shark research in Canada, at least, needs bait in the water. Some other jurisdictions, they have spotter planes, but for a number of reasons that doesn't work that well in the conditions of Atlantic Canada and in how sharks use the habitat up here. So there's usually bait in the water. This line that you can see here is the bait, and so there's somebody watching the bait, because one of the goals of the research project is to not have the sharks consume the bait. We don't want to alter their natural behavior in any way. So the bait is in the water. It's usually tuna or seal if there's like dead seals that watch up, and the response programs have seal. And so there's somebody on the bait line, and as the shark is spotted and swims to investigate the bait, because they're very curious, the bait is pulled in to get it out of the shark's way, and also to get the shark, most importantly, close to the boat. And then there will be a tagger, and they attach the tag to the shark by jabbing it into the dorsal muscle. So you want the tag to go, you can see in this one, you want it to go as close to the dorsal fin as possible so that it has the fewest impacts on drag of swimming. And that is where they have found that they are retained best. So if you can get the tag right there, it will last longer and you will get more data. Usually it's one tag, but sometimes they will put both of the tags that are being passed around on one chart, and then you can get a lot of even more interesting data, and you can validate your data between the tags. And another way to get information information, there's a lot of groups that collaborate on photo ID. So you can see the top shark there on its dorsal fin on the back. It's got like a jagged edge. And then the shark on the bottom, the counter shading between the gray and white will be unique to each shark. And then, I'm not sure if you can see it, but the top of the shark's head on the bottom has scratch marks, and those are actually from seals, as they attempt to predate seals. You'll often see them with scratch marks on their head. So all of that can be used to contribute to a pretty large photo ID database that's run by the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy out of Massachusetts, that researchers submit their data to, and they can answer a lot of interesting questions with their photo ID database, so things like threats or resighting different sharks at different intervals throughout the range, and even getting at population estimates kind of through marker capture, so which sharks are sighted how many times. Yeah, that's how you tag a shark. The results of the DFO tagging program so far are kind of already summarized in the preceding slides, but overall they show that white sharks are seasonally using Atlantic Canadian waters, so more predictably at some times than others. Very wide range throughout the region, and from the sharks that have been tagged as well as observed, we know that there's a mix of sub-adults and mature adults. So like I said, no really young sharks, so usually sharks that are almost adults or recently adults and sometimes bigger, and males and females. Yeah, this is the tagging. And in terms of last year's research, so DFO was off the Magdalen Islands, two of the less or uninhabited islands up near the top that are bird colonies. And they went out in August, and they did 4 days of field work. They planned to be there a lot longer, but they deployed all their tags in 4 days, which was shocking and great. It was super efficient, but I don't think they expected that much success in that short amount of time. So, like I mentioned, tags are pretty expensive, and even to get the 28 out that they got was fantastic. I think that was their best year yet by maybe twice as many sharks. So they put out acoustic satellite tags, and they also collected biopsies as well. So at the end of this pointy stick on the top right there, there's sometimes another punch where they take a very small sample of tissue, and then they can use that tissue for DNA analysis, or to look at levels of the blood, or to assess overall health or hormone levels. There's a lot of questions about where and when they reproduce, so a tissue sample can be really valuable. Yeah, and the top here is a shark. These are the sharks that they tagged, that you can see the tags on. And then this is sightings in Atlantic Canada up till 2023. This is in the recovery strategy, so you can find it online, and I think I'll send this around. And there's also a website where you can go and dig into these with more detail on the government's open data portal. But important to note that these are just where people are seeing sharks. So if there's not people there, they won't be seeing sharks. So obviously these are coastally biased. But interesting to note that even just with opportunistic sightings, it's pretty spread out, and obviously number around PEI. These were two recent white shark sightings in PEI. Some of you may have heard of these. On the left is a shark that washed ashore dead in Greenwich Beach in the provincial or the national park. And then on the right is a shark that washed, well, it was first seen stranded and not looking right near Tracadie, and then when they went back out to look for it, it had washed ashore dead. And both of these were taken to the Atlantic Veterinary College. It was fortunate that they washed up in PEI. Like, we never want a dead shark, but if there is a dead shark, it's a really valuable way to get a lot of data that we can't otherwise get. So it was great that the Atlantic Vet College did a full necropsy of both these sharks. Their initial finding was that they seemed healthy, they had just eaten, there was no signs of trauma or other human-induced mortality, but they did a ton of biological sampling, so they are going to publish those results, but nothing to note as of yet. And then we've also had, over the years, a considerable amount of reports of tuna being bit by white shark. after they're caught, once they're alongside the boat. This was from Tignish in 2021, and you can see the bite marks there. White shark are unique in their tooth shape, so it's pretty easy to identify when it's been a white shark teeth, even if it's just like in fishing buoys or that kind of thing, or tuna. We always want people to report white shark or shark sightings in general. If you see a shark or you think you've seen a shark, we have a website where you can report, and it will be reviewed by white shark scientists to evaluate the likelihood of the species ID. So if you know anyone or if you have seen a shark, we always love reports. And then I just have a couple slides on other sharks that you might see or that exist off PEI that aren't protected under the Species at Risk Act, but they have all been assessed one way or another under CSIWIC. The first is Greenland shark, which was very recently assessed as threatened, so there will be a consultation for its listing process coming up, so you can check the registry to participate in that. But it's in the top right here. Greenland shark belong to a family of shark known as sleeper sharks because of their very slow and sweepy movement. And then the second photo down shows the area of extent, so they mostly occur in very deep and cold waters, but we do have records of them occurring off PEI into the Gulf. There's not a lot known about them because their habitat is so inaccessible. I think most of the information comes from fisheries that have interacted with them as bycatch up north. But their primary threats are capture and fishing gear and also climate change because they live in cold water habitats. And they're very at risk to human threats because of their life history. So they are maturing at 150 years old, and they have been documented living up to 400 years old. There's a lot of debate about those numbers, but we do know they are very large, which is interesting and cool. But it is unlikely that you, unfortunately, would see a Greenland shark because they live in very deep waters. But they could be here.
When you say they mature at 100 years old, does that mean that they don't reproduce
Yeah.
until they're 100?
Mm-hmm. So they're very susceptible. If this shark lives 100 years and is bycaught, it still will not have been able to reproduce and contribute to population recovery. So even low levels of fishery removal can really impact their survival. And then we also have pork eagle, which is often mistaken for white shark because it has a similar body shape. It's also part of the family of slightly warm-blooded sharks. These are assessed, it's been assessed over the years by CSIWIC as special concern originally, and then threatened, and I think now endangered. They're pretty widely distributed in Canadian waters. You could have them in the Gulf, but they're a lot more common offshore along the shelf, but we do have records of them around here. There was pretty substantial declines in the 60s, and then some recovery in the 80s, and then a pretty significant collapse in the 1990s. Slight increase in the early 2000s, but not a substantial population estimate has been produced since then, but there is research underway via tagging program for pork eagle. They're in the bottom, so you can see how they would be confused for a white shark.
What do they eat?
Fish as well, yeah.
Oh, see.
They're smaller than a white shark, but they're still a pretty substantially sized shark. There's no records of them interacting with humans ever, but yeah, they eat fish. And then our last two sharks are short-fin mako, which is also assessed by CSIWIC and is under listing consideration. I should say that the first three sharks are under listing consideration, so they could be listed under the Species at Risk Act. There's just not been a decision yet. But they are assessed as endangered. They're found pretty broadly throughout, so throughout the Atlantic Canada region, also more so offshore, but could be off PEI waters. I believe they are the fastest shark in the ocean. I don't know how fast they swim, but they are very speedy. And as with a lot of sharks, they were depleted due to overfishing, and there was declines in estimates of relative abundance for the species of over 50%. And now outside of the targeted fishery, which doesn't occur, their main threat is bycatch in pelagic longline, which is tuna fishery. And then our last shark species is not at risk. It was recently, within the last few years, reassessed by CSIC as not at risk. They're pretty widely distributed, a lot more abundant than other larger sharks. They're smaller. On the right, you can see, on the bottom right, you can see that they occur pretty much throughout the oceans other than the really cold areas. They are more productive than most sharks and fast growing, so they have a shorter lifespan and they produce more sharks in one litter. Most common offshore, but we do have records of them and sightings of them pretty frequently in the Gulf. And as with the other sharks, their main threat is bycatch in longline fisheries. That's everything. Thank you. If you have more questions, I will be very happy to answer them. And I also have some info sheets back there if you want about different species. And then I also brought some sheets on my favorite species at risk, which is the Atlantic mudpiddick. So if you're ever in the Minas Basin, they only live there. You can get a little brochure about them. But otherwise, yeah, thank you very much. Cold-blooded at the same time? It's a great question that I actually do not know the answer to. It's something about the physiology of like how they can, I think it's like related to their digestion maybe. It's something about like internal heat capacity and they're like moving things around inside. Yeah?
You didn't mention orcas in Atlantic Canada. I wonder if you could comment on their status.
Yes, they have been assessed by CSIC. I don't do a lot of whale stuff, so... orcas. What's the status of orcas in Atlantic Canada? They are seasonal occurrence. One of my favorite orca facts is that there's orca that occurs in the Bay of Fundy pretty much every year. His name is Old Tom. He's got like a bent fin, and he occurs every year with a pod of white-sided dolphins. So they seem to be like living their lives together, which is super cool. Yeah, but definitely not as prevalent as on the West Coast. Obviously, you hear about those orcas a lot, but they have been assessed by CSIC as one of the, I think, threatened or endangered, but I'm not positive which. Yeah? Oh, yes, we do have thresher sharks. I don't think they've been assessed, but yes, we have thresher sharks in the region as well. I'm not sure if they come inshore as much. I think they're more offshore.
Dogfish.
Dogfish, yes. I didn't put dogfish in here, but we do have dogfish. Dogfish are still sharks, but smaller, and they have spikes on the back of them, which is really cool. Some of them are venomous. Yeah?
How shallow can they, like if I'm swimming over my head, am I in danger? Or even if I'm in water up to my waist, can they like...
They have been recorded inshore. Yeah, there was off a beach in Nova Scotia. There was a paddleboarder who saw one last summer, and I think he was in like 4 feet of water, which is like unusual, but they can come in closer. Yeah.
How common is it for a shark to actually attack a human being?
How common?
Yeah.
It attacks. Not common. There's been one potential interaction with humans in 2021 off Cape Breton, and then we don't have any records off PEI. Usually people would advise you to be like shark smart, which is to know when sharks are usually feeding, which is usually like dawn and dusk, kind of more crepuscularly. And it's, I don't know if you see a lot of seals and they all flee the area, like that's a good thing to pay attention to. But yeah, that's what it's for. Yeah.
Most of these big sharks, are they just having one young a year, or is it maybe even over 2 or 3 years? Or
I'm not sure. I feel like we would probably know more for like porbeagle and mako, but a lot of them have like not an annual reproductive cycle, so it would be over 2 or 3 years, usually. I know leatherbacks, which is different obviously, but leatherbacks are usually like every 2 years they'll lay a number of clutches.
I've heard that shark can track down blood from up to 10 miles away. So, you know, if you have an open sore or you're bleeding otherwise from any orifice of your body, you should not be in the water.
Yeah.
Track the shark.
That might not be a bad idea. They also have electroreceptors kind of in their, like, what would be their nose area, so it's thought that they can use those to hear, like, struggling fish from farther away, which is really cool. Yeah.
Is there any, like, recreational fishery, like if people want to go catch a shark, are they allowed to do it in America? I'm not saying I want to, but if we want to go do it,
Yeah.
is there any of the species that people are allowed to go target, or is it just generally leave them all alone?
I think there are blue shark charters, which would be catch and release. They often are paired with like a tagging. For blue sharks, they have what they call spaghetti tags, so they're kind of like a band or like a fin tag that they put in and release them. There used to be shark derbies off Nova Scotia until recent years, which were also catch and release, but those haven't operated recently, and by the end they were all blue shark as well. So I would think blue shark would be the most recreational available shark. But they would all be catch and release.
How reliable is like that shark apps, like Shark Tracker and things?
Yeah, so how reliable are the shark trackers? Do you mean in terms of your recreation in the
Yeah.
ocean? There is, so those are interesting. Like a while ago there was a story that there was a shark in the Halifax harbor, but there's a lot of error in the tagging data. Like that's the real-time data, but for actual research, scientists would then either get the tag back or download the data and correct that. So there can be a pretty big margin of error. And then the subset of sharks that we suspect exist in the population versus those that are tagged are very different. So it can tell you generally where sharks might be. Like it's informative. I look at it. I'm kind of a nerd about it, so I'm always on there like seeing who's where. But there's a lot of sharks that aren't tagged. So
Are basking sharks also on the list of threatened?
yes, basking sharks. I can't remember what assessment, but they have also been. They're in the process of being assessed by CSIC. So I think there will be an assessment coming out before too long, but basking shark are also super interesting and known to occur throughout. Yeah, go ahead.
Curious about species like bluefin tuna that have been assessed by CSIC but not listed.
Yeah.
Can you explain why that happens sometimes?
So it's usually different for each species. Oh, sorry. For species that have been assessed by CSIC, such as bluefin tuna but not listed, why would that happen? Usually it's because the decision has been made to manage it under some other mechanism. So I'm not sure what the rationale for bluefin tuna is, but it could be because it can be managed under the Fisheries Act. Like if all of its threats are fishing, it might be determined that a better tool for managing it and providing for recovery might be a different legislative tool, kind of.
Paige,
Yeah.
do we know how the male and female find each other?
Ooh, good question. No. Interestingly, I think I have a photo of it here somewhere. There's maybe in Australia in the last few years, they think they may have documented mating. There's also been cool papers that show that they have this is also in Australia, like non-random associations with each other, so you might be more likely to see, I think in the paper they for public appeal call it friends, like you might be more likely to see some sharks with other sharks more predictably, so they might have, I don't want to call it a social relationship, but some sort of structure. And then one of these you can kind of see potential mating. So this one here on, so the top here, you do see sharks. I don't know if that's a female because you can't see. You can see based on near the pelvic fins if it's upside down if it's a female or not, but we do sometimes see what we think are mating marks. So that kind of looks like a shark bite on top of the head. So yeah, it does seem quite involved based on the scars that we've seen.
Do they have some way to communicate with each other?
I don't know. I think that's a really good question. Oh, sorry, do they have some way to communicate? each other to find each other in terms of mating? It's a great question. We don't know. I've heard, and I don't know if this is like validated in the data, you might see more tag data of large females going offshore in between mating years, and one hypothesis is that maybe that's to avoid the like pressures of male sharks seeking out females to mate, so they might head more into the offshore environment to just do their own thing. But no, we really don't know a lot about the structure within the population.
They generally swim alone, don't they?
Well, we think so, yeah.
Great, let's say the white shark, they don't go in pairs.
No, you don't see, like, with marine mammals, you do. Sorry, the question is, do they swim alone? So we don't really see that they have aggregations like that.
They could be 100 miles apart or 1,000, and somehow they have to find each other.
Yeah, a lot of people think that we will eventually find, like, the mating area in the Pacific. They call it the White Shark Cafe. I'm not sure why, but it's like an offshore area where they think that they congregate to mate, but we just don't know if or where that exists for the Atlantic population. So there might be an area where it is easier for them to kind of descend on, but we're just not sure. It's a big mystery.
Well, they've had billions of years, haven't they, to develop possibly a little area where they meet.
Yes, they are very old and evolved, which is cool.
Or it could be electrical signals, it could be smell.
Yeah, we really don't know what they would use to find each other for mating, but obviously it's like energetically costly to be searching for each other, so you would presume there's some kind of way, but we don't know.